have not already done so. So we have talked about some hints to help. One option that I gave you to help with that is Sohcahtoa. So I would recommend when you get your quiz, writing down the definition of your six trig functions at the top so you have that to reference. Now, hopefully you just know them, but if not, we can think of this as drawing a triangle. Okay, we talked about x, y, and r. Where does r go? The hypotenuse. Your x is along the x-axis. Your y is your vertical side, so along the y-axis. Does everybody understand how we label those? Okay, let's do this in terms of opposite, adjacent, and hypotenuse. So the hypotenuse is which one? R. Okay, from here, which side is opposite? Y. Opposite is across from, not touching. And so that means x has to be my adjacent. Does everybody understand how we got hypotenuse, opposite, and adjacent? Okay. So, we look at this. So, S-O-H. So that means sine is the opposite. Opposite was y over h. H was hypotenuse, which is r. So sine is y over r. C. So C stands for cosine. A equals the adjacent side, which is x. H is the hypotenuse, which is r. Toa. So T is for tangent. O is opposite, which is y. A is adjacent, which is x. What's the reciprocal of sine? So that means cosecant is r over x. Reciprocal of cosine, or sorry, not r over x, r over y. What's the reciprocal of cosine? So secant is r over x. Reciprocal of tangent is? So cotangent is x over y. Alright, does everyone understand how we got this? So if you know them, you can just jot that down at the top of your paper when you get it. If you don't, think Sohcahtoa. Draw this picture and go from there. Alright? So let's run through the types of questions that I will ask on this quiz. We may not work all these in their entirety. We'll kind of see what we need and work through. So the first thing we did was talking about our angles. You know, if I drew this, what quadrant is 3, -4 in?
4.
Yep. So we're looking at this angle. Does anyone draw a triangle and do Sohcahtoa, or are you guys all pretty much using x, y, and r at this point? X, y, and r? Okay. So what's my x?
3.
What's my y? Okay, how do we get r?
X squared plus y squared equals r squared.
Alright. We can use x squared plus y squared equals r squared. So 3 squared plus -4 squared equals r squared. So r is 5. And so then you should be able to do your 6 trig functions. What is the definition of sine? That would be -4 over 5. Then if you know sine, you know it's reciprocal. Cosecant would be 5 over -4. Definition of cosine is, so that would be 3/5. So its reciprocal secant would be 5/3. Definition of tangent, so that's -4 over 3. So its reciprocal cotangent is 3 over -4. So if you know your definitions, then it's just a matter of setting up fractions. Any questions on that one? So So we can handle that easily enough. Okay. Then we did the same type of problem, but instead of giving you an ordered pair, I would give you a requirement. So we still have to find x, y, and r so we can do our definition. I'm telling you that y has to be less than or equal to 0. So let's start with a y value. So we just have to pick something. What kind of number does y need to be? Negative. So what do you want to use?
-1.
All right. So then we could find x. So we get our x to be 3 over 2. You can deal with this. We talked about how sometimes the fractions are not the nicest. How could I get rid of my fraction?
Times it by.
So if you take one of them times 2, take both. So let's use a y of -2 and an x of 3. Then what do we do?
Y squared plus R squared.
X squared plus y squared equals r squared. So r is the square root of 13. Remember, r is positive no matter what. So now we have x, y, and r, so again, it's just a matter of definition. I'm not going to do all of them, but I do want to talk about a couple. So when we do sine, we know sine is y over r, so that's -2 over radical 13. Can we leave it like that? No, so you have to multiply the radical 13 on top and bottom. So it'd be -2 radical 13 over 13. And then what would cosecant be?
Radical 13 and -2.
We talked about how it's easier to flip the 1 before you move the radical. And then could we do the other 4 functions? Just a matter of our definition. Okay. So we did problems like this. That part okay? Okay, x, y, and r, and then you're good to go. Then we did some problems where we had to think about these definitions at our quadrantal angles. And so what I had you do is think about points. So what would this point, what do we use for this point?
1,
1, 0. X is positive 1, y is 0. Think about it. If you're on the x-axis, you didn't go up or down, so that y is 0. So at this point, I didn't move left or right, so my x is 0, and I went up 1, so y is positive 1. If I plotted this point, my x would be, and my y is, and if I use this point, my x is, and y is. And the benefit of these, all of them have the exact same r. What does r turn out to be every time? 1. So now these, it's just a matter of the definitions. So we've already written down our definitions. What was the definition of cosecant? So you go to 90 degrees, so this is like 0, 90, 180, 270. So at 0, r is 1 no matter what. Sorry, at 90, r is 1. And my y is 1. So 1 over 1 is 1. Minus 4 times the tangent of 360. What's the definition of tangent? So at 360, my y is 0, x is 1, so 0 divided by 1 is 0. Okay, what plus 2 times the cosine of 180? What is the definition of cosine?
X is raw.
So at 180, my x is -1, r is 1, -1 divided by 1 is -1. So then we have 1 minus 0 minus 2, which gives me -1. So I could ask you to evaluate those quadrantal angles. So just draw that little picture and think about your x, y, and r definition again. Everything goes back to that definition. Alright, is that one okay? Okay, then this is a problem like yesterday. Find sine if cosine is negative 5/8 and tangent is positive. What's the definition of cosine? We know r is always positive, so x would have to be a negative 5, r would have to be a positive 8. Okay, now what do I need to do?
We'll do x squared plus y squared equals 8 squared.
So y squared equals 39. Okay, now we have to decide if y is positive or negative. Tangent is positive, but my cosine was negative. So if we think about what quadrant we're in, all students take calculus. So cosine's positive in 1 and 3. But if cosine is negative, which one are we in? Quadrant 3. If you're in the third quadrant, is your y positive or negative? So now we have our y. We're asked to find sine. Definition of sine is y over r. So it would be negative radical 39 over 8. So again, goes back to that x, y, and r. Questions there? Just a couple more. If I give you cosecant, how do you get sine? This isn't supposed to be a hard one, guys.
3/4.
Yeah, 3/4. They're reciprocal, so you don't even have to find your x, y,
I'm
and r.
getting confused with sine and cosine with the secant and cosecant.
Okay, so which one's flipping which? So basically think your normal functions are sine, cosine, tangent. Okay, so the reciprocal of sine is cosecant. Basically what I remember is when you're doing the reciprocals, they start with opposite letters. So then the reciprocal of cosine is secant. So again, one of them starts with a C and one of them starts with an S. And that's how I kind of think which one's which. Okay, this is like the last section of problems that we did yesterday. I did like 86 and 90 on the board for you and talked about those. So I just want to know what, if this would be a positive or a negative. So we have to start with this inequality. How would you get a negative h? So then you get negative 90 is, you'd have to flip it, greater than h is greater than negative 270. Okay, you can think about the negative angles if you want. Would you guys rather I deal with the negative or find coterminal? What are you more comfortable with? Alright, so if you don't like the negative, you could just add 360, right? So negative 90 plus 360 is 270.
So every time it's a negative, you can add 360.
So negative 270 plus 360 is 90. So this is saying it's between 90 and 270. So it has to be right here. So if we're thinking about cosine, all students, so in quadrant 2, sine is positive, so cosine would be negative. Take, so tangent's positive, so cosine is negative. So in both of those it's negative, so our final answer is negative.
So, and this is all students take pre-cal, whatever.
Or take calculus,
Take
yeah.
calculus, I mean, for S, everyone except sine is negative.
And it's reciprocal.
So
Because so
cosine.
sine and cosecant would be positive, everything else is negative. So here tangent's positive, so that means cotangent would also be positive. The other four are negative. Last one. I'm asking for the quadrant. So we're thinking all students take calculus. So this means in quadrant 1 they're all positive, in quadrant 2 sine, quadrant 3 tangent, quadrant 4 cosine. If tangent is positive, when is tangent positive? 1 and 3. Secant is negative. When I see secant, that's the reciprocal of cosine. So I'm asking when cosine is negative. So we know that cosine is positive in 1 and 4. So it's negative in 2 and 3. So which quadrant worked for both of them? Quadrant 3. Questions on any of this? Ultimately, guys, 90% of this comes down to your definition. So I would write that down first, and then you have it to reference when you're doing